Paris Eternal. This is probably going to be the hottest take of the entire video, but a part of me just thinks this team is going to do well, starting off with the best part of the team, which is the supports. Con and Dridro were a sick duo last year, and I expect them and the rest of the team to do even better under better ping. Con was arguably a top 5 Ana, and his Zen and Bap were very impactful as well. Meanwhile Dridro was pretty consistent on every main support and especially his Brig. This team may struggle in double flex support, but knowing Dridro I'm confident he could flex over to Bap. Then talking about the rest of this team, I think they're all okay, but the reason I rate them highly is because of the fact that they'll likely be on lower ping. Naga had an incredible Pharah and Deco last season, while also playing a pretty good Mei and Sombra. Glister, his DPS partner, played a lot of things last year. His role on the Shock last year changed throughout the season. When Striker was still around he played the long-range hitscan, but when Striker left and Ans came in he played more close-range hitscan. As a result he has a very deep hero pool. He can play Tracer, Sombra, Cassidy, Hanzo, Widow, Doomfist, Ashe, Sim, and probably more that we didn't get to see. He isn't super top tier at any of these heroes, but he can play them all consistently to an above average level. The tank line is also pretty solid. Vestola was a pretty good div, and Sigma meanwhile Dan was a little underrated in my opinion. His Ball, Orisa, and Rhine were all pretty good. He even looked pretty good on Hog those few times he played it in Stage 2. A lack of flexibility on Winston and Zarya might hurt this team, but probably not too bad. Then finally the coaching. This part is a little concerning. Losing Get Amazed has gotta hurt at least a little bit, but J-Mac being promoted to head coach isn't too bad. The guy is definitely talented. Mobuji however is someone who I have my doubts about, considering he's never shown super good results until super recently, but knowing Arvola and her godlike team building abilities, I don't see coaching being a big issue for this team. Overall this team fits into the slightly above average tier. All these guys except Glister managed to perform super well under their high ping, and I can only imagine how good they'll become under low ping and a slight upgrade at hitscan. Me putting them so high definitely has to do with a hopium overdose, but I also look back at this team historically and notice how every year people don't rate them very highly and they've always managed to surpass expectations. I see this pattern continuing heading into Overwatch 2. New York Excelsior. This team is looking really stacked. Starting with the best part of the team, I think we have to talk about the DPS. Yaki and Flora is a sick combination. Neither of their hero pools overlap except for on Tracer, but out of all DPS heroes in the game I think Tracer is the one you want multiple good players at the most. Both of these guys carried their teams on Tracer last season and both also play a lot of other things. Yaki can play the Echo, Mei, Pharah, Genji, and even a bit of Hanzo. Meanwhile Flora can play the Cassidy, Ashe, Sombra, and Reaper. These two can cover almost every relevant DPS hero to an above average level. Next let's discuss the support line. Despite not having a main support yet, they still have a cracked double flex support duo. Gangnam Jin and Myeonbong are both cracked players and don't have much hero pool overlap. Gangnam Jin covers the Bap and Moira, which are both heroes that Myeonbong struggled on. Meanwhile Myeonbong can play the Zen and Ana. Both of these guys were standout players on struggling teams last year, and that seems to be the general theme of this NYXL roster. All four of these guys played in bottom half teams last season, yet all of them still stood out as top half players. Now seeing them all unite is gonna be epic. And finally for the lone tank we have Kellen. They are probably gonna sign an off tank. But for now this roster has Kellen, who is probably the best Korean main tank out of contenders. This guy showed off incredible skills on all main tanks, especially Wrecking Ball during the most recent season of Korean contenders. This guy should play super well for the team. And now for the coaching, we have head coach Cookie coming from the Florida Mayhem alongside Yaki and Gangnam Jin, and assistant coach Undyne returning from last year. This is a pretty solid coaching staff. Despite not doing super well in 2021, all of Cookie's other results as a coach are positive, so I'm optimistic about him. Then talking about Undine, I think he'll also be a good piece. As soon as he joined the NYXL mid-season, the team looked much better. Overall, this NYXL roster feels very strong. I think a top half finish in NA is very likely, and I can see them pulling up a few big upsets here and there. San Francisco Shock, the two-time champions, despite not being the absolute best, are still looking scary. This team has taken a new approach to their roster this year. Instead of picking up well-established veterans, they've gone for a primarily rookie squad. Let's start off with the elephant in the room. Let's talk about Proper. This guy is basically Korean Leave. The man can play so many DPS heroes to an elite level and is probably top contention for Rookie of the Year right now. To list off this guy's hero pool, he can play Tracer, Echo, Genji, Hanzo, Ashe, Widow, Cassidy, Doomfist, Reaper, and Pharah. This guy carried O2 Blast in contenders, leading them to back-to-back stage championships. He is a jack of all trades, master of all. But the Shock have also brought along a few of his O2 Blast teammates. Finn and Kilo will be joining him. First let's talk about Kilo and I'll get to Finn later. Kilo was one of the two hitscan players for O2 Blast, and he plays a lot of the pure aim-based hitscans like Cassidy, Widow, and Ashe. The guy has some pretty insane name, so he'll make for an ONS-like player. Then finally, to round out this killer DPS line, we have the Redbird Flex DPS Sam, or as Prediction Gods TTS calls him S9mm. This guy has a similar hero pool to Nero, playing mostly projectile heroes like Echo, Mei, Genji, and Sombra. He won the most recent season of NA Contenders and has found mostly good results throughout 2021. He should round out this DPS trio nicely. The DPS of this team are all very talented and are just bursting with potential. I can't wait to see these guys in action. Next let's talk about the tank line. Currently this team only has Super, and that's not too bad. Super is still a top 5 Rhine and Orisa. His Winston is pretty good, and despite not having a super good wrecking ball, he's still a very good main tank. Then the supports, and this is the part that worries me the most. They currently have Finn, Violet, and no main support. Starting with Finn, this guy was absolutely cracked in contenders with O2 Blast. Despite Proper getting most of the attention, Finn wasn't too far behind. His mechanics and general gameplay on Zen, Ana and Bap were all incredible, and considering that he's playing with two of his teammates from contenders, he should be very well synergized with the team. Now let's talk about Violet, and I think he is going to be the one to make or break this team, specifically what the coaches decide to do with him. We all know what this guy is capable of. His skill ceiling is above the clouds, on Moira, Zen and Bap. But last year we saw how, when not properly utilized, that he just wasn't that good. The team put him on main support due to troubles with synergy between him and FD God, and when he did play the flex support it looked much worse. His Moira was still good, but his Bap just didn't hold up to all the other top Baps in the league. Even Twilight I'd argue looked better on that hero. His Zen was okay, he had like one good performance on it, but overall he just wasn't as good. I fear that if this team doesn't get a main support, or gets a main support that doesn't do well with Violet, we could end up seeing a similar performance to that of last year, with him jumping back and forth between being a main support and a flex support. But in a double flex support meta, the Shock should be fully equipped. Finally, the coaching. The Shock have brought back assistant coach 9K from the Philly Fusion and kept head coach Krusty and assistant coach Cassors from last year. This coaching staff is pretty good. When working with good assistant coaches like the two he has now, we've seen what Krusty can do. Now it's just a matter of execution. Despite heading into a new game, I have confidence that Krusty can build a well-synergized roster during this off-season. Overall, this Shock team may not be as dominant looking as previous iterations, but it's still a top half roster to look out for. Chengdu Hunters. This team has kept almost all of the players that made last year so successful. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. Leaf is by far the best player on the team, nothing against anyone else on the roster, we'll talk about them later, but the MVP himself returning to this team is super big, especially heading into Overwatch 2, which seems to be a more solo-oriented game. Leaf will probably carry even more than he did in Overwatch 1. As I've discussed before, he is incredibly flexible and can play so many different heroes to a top level. I'm just gonna list those heroes on the screen since again I've already discussed this all before. However, the rest of this team is still really solid. Jinmu and Aprite are both very solid DPS partners and have very different hero pools. Jinmu covers most of the projectile needs like Pharah, Mei, Torb, Genji, and can also play a good Sombra. Meanwhile, Aprite handles a lot of the hitscan needs like Cassidy, Ashe, Reaper, and Widow when Leaf needs to play Echo or a double hitscan meta occurs. I wanna touch on Aprite a little bit more though. Promoting him from Team Chaser is super big. The amount of times he popped off and carried the team is just ridiculous. He led the Hunters Academy team to back-to-back Chinese Contenders Championships in 2021. He gives this team extra firepower as if they didn't have enough of that already. Him, Leaf and Jinmu should make for a sick DPS trio, arguably top 5 DPS line in the whole league. Then for the tank line, we have Gargo as the solo tank at least for now. I'm hoping they promote Dai from their academy team to be the off-tank. But until then, Gargo is the tank they'll be working with, and what he showed last year was incredible. His Wrecking Ball was top 3 in the league, and his Winston and Orisa were both great as well, both definitely top half of the league. Then finally the supports, they have kept the same 4 supports from last year, although I do expect them to drop at least one of them. But until then, this team is still working with Monk, who is a top 3 Zen in the league, and his Ana and Bap were also top half in my opinion. Farway 1987, who is a pretty good Zen and Ana, however he didn't play much last year, so I expect him to only come in for double flex support. Yveltal, who is a top 3 Brig and Mercy, and Nisha, who is also a top 3 Mercy and a pretty good Brig. These 4 guys are all pretty talented. However, their hero pools overlap a lot. If Lucio or Moira ever becomes meta, they could struggle a bit, but these guys are all so good on their comfort picks that I don't see that being much of an issue. Finally, the coaching. Losing RUI is pretty bad, but they've replaced him with J-Feel and kept Creed and Yoxi from last year. J-Feel is a big pickup. This guy has 2 championships under his belt. One with 2021 Dragons and one with 2018 Spitfire. That alone tells you how big this guy is, and resigning Creed and Yoxi is pretty good as well, considering Chengdu's top 5 finish last year. Keeping these 2 makes sense. Overall, this team is stacked with talent. The DPS line I expect to pop off a lot, and the tanks and supports are all pretty solid as well. But there is a handful of other teams that just feel a little bit better. Toronto Defiant. Now we are entering the elite level territory. Starting off with the best part of the roster, I think it has to be the supports. This support line has potential to compete with Jagon and Izayaki. That's how good they are, top 5 if not top 3. Starting with Chochrong. This guy was the best main support coming out of Contenders this season, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. His Brig, Lucio, and Mercy are all crazy good, and he can probably play BAP if needed, and I expect him to be like Lee Jae-gon when he entered the league in 2020. Meanwhile, Twilight is a proven veteran who's consistently been a top half flex support for 3 years straight. He can play the BAP, he can play the Zen, he can play Ana especially well, and even Moira if needed, so the supports are pretty cracked. Now let's discuss the rest of the team. The DPS line looks to be pretty good as well. They've brought back Hisu and acquired Allo and Finale from Contenders. This is the part of the team that I'm the most worried about. These guys are all good players, don't get me wrong, Hsu has shown he is very flexible playing Sombra, Cassidy, Ashe, Widow, Hanzo, Reaper, and even a bit of Rat to an Overwatch League level. Finale played for the Uprising Academy in NA Contenders and hit top 3 finishes in the 2 most recent seasons playing heroes like Echo, Genji, and Mei. And although whoever since leaving the disastrous 2020 Spitfire roster has found nothing but success in Korean Contenders with O2 Blast and BM Hawk playing heroes like Tracer, Echo, and Mei. But I think some of the other DPS lines in the league have higher ceilings and will outperform these guys in big games, but this trio is still very talented nonetheless and that can't be denied. Then for the tank line, which I think is a little underrated, the Defiant will be running with Muse and Hotba. Starting off with Muse, I think he was super underappreciated on the Glads last season. The other 5 guys on that team were making a lot of flashy plays, so the attention was kind of stolen from him. He didn't go for a lot of the big plays, but he does what the team needs him to do and is very consistent. He's one of the only main tanks in the league last season who played every main tank to a top half level. His ball was top 3, his Orisa was top 5, arguably top 3, his Winston was top half, arguably top 5. And his Rhine, despite not being as good as his other heroes, was still top half. He should make for a very stable front line. Meanwhile Hotba was kind of the opposite of Muse. He went for a lot of flashy plays on Zarya and D.Va, but unlike in 2020, he managed to do it without feeding. Top half on every off-tank. D.Va and Sigma were pretty good and his Zarya was the best in the league in my opinion. These 2 guys are kind of going under the radar, and I'm predicting they end up doing super well. Finally, the coaching. They've kept head coach KDG and assistant coach Yang Won and brought in assistant coach Mobidic. This is what I call a strong coaching staff. Despite not doing super well last year, we've seen what KDG and Yang Won are capable of with better players. Yang Won Season 2 finished first in the regular season with the Titans and second in the playoffs. Meanwhile KDG Season 3 finished second in the regular season with the Fusion and fourth in playoffs. Now that these coaches are working with better players, I think they can elevate this Defiant roster to new heights. And bringing in Mobidic, who was with KDG during Fusion's Season 3 domination, just makes this coaching staff even better. Overall, this Defiant roster is looking light years better than they did in previous years. However, the DPS line just does not feel as top tier as the rest of the team and brings them down from top 5. Houston Outlaws. Now this is a team that's looking to take home the trophy. This roster is stacked from top to bottom. Starting with the best part of the roster, I think the DPS line is pretty top tier. Dante, Pelican and Merit will probably dominate. Dante is a proven veteran who plays an elite level Tracer, Sombra and Echo. Pelican was Rookie of the Year and a Grand Finalist last season, carrying the Atlanta Reign on quite a few different heroes including Pharah, Echo, Mei, Tracer, Sombra, Genji, Reaper and even Torban Soldier. And then there's Merit, who won Korean Contenders with O2 Blast, playing mostly hitscan heroes like Sombra, Cassidy, and Ashe to a very high level. This DPS line is undoubtedly top half of the league and I'd even say top 5. All 3 of these guys are cracked and can surely carry this team to victory. Now for tank line, and currently this team is only working with Piggy. They're likely gonna sign another tank, but until then Piggy is the guy for the job, and honestly he was super good last year. His Zarya and Sigma were both top 3 and I'd say his Sigma was the best in the league. Meanwhile his D.Va was pretty good as well, and his name is literally Piggy, so he should be good for Hog as well. Now for the supports, and currently they don't have a main support, but they'll probably get one soon. Until then they're working with Lestro and Iris. These 2 could be disgustingly good. Iris really made a name for himself on last year's Atlanta roster, making it to Grand Finals and playing the second best BAP in the league in my opinion. His BAP was disgustingly good, but the few times he played it, he was super good on Ana and Moira as well. His aggressive style and general playmaking ability should help this team succeed. Meanwhile Lestro was a standout on a mid-tier Defiant roster last year. For the 2 seasons he's been in the league, he's always been a consistent player on Ana and Zen especially. Zen specifically is a hero that Iris struggled on last year that Lestro happens to be very good at, so he fills in the gap in Iris's hero pool. I expect these two to dominate in a double flex support meta. Finally, the coaching. The Outlaws currently have Junkbuck as head coach and Jake as an assistant coach. I think now that Junkbuck is the definitive one and only head coach and not sharing that position with Harshaw, him and the team should overall find more success. Meanwhile, Jake finally being a full-time coach and not a player coach should mean he gets to focus more on helping the team succeed. I'm hoping this team signs at least one more coach, but even if they don't, I have faith in these two, knowing Junkbuck was a back-to-back champion coach with the shock and Jake's high knowledge of the game. Overall, this team feels scary good. They seem pretty stacked from top to bottom, with 2 grand finalists, a back-to-back champion coach, and tons of firepower, and I think they genuinely have a very good chance of winning a stage title and maybe even the grand finals if everything goes their way. Seoul Dynasty. This genuinely feels like the first time the Dynasty have a consistently top-tier roster. Starting with the best part of the team, it has to be the DPS. Heading into Overwatch 2, the Dynasty are working with the Prophets duo and Stalker. This has the potential to be the best DPS line in the league, at least top 5. Prophet and Fitz were a top 5 DPS duo last season, carrying the rest of the Dynasty way too many times. Prophet has always been a top-tier DPS, playing so many DPS heroes to an elite level including Tracer, Pharah, Mei, Genji, Hanzo, Ashe, and most recently he managed to get pretty good at Echo. Meanwhile, Fitz probably had his best season in 2021, playing an incredible Sombra, Widow, Ashe, Hanzo, and in my opinion the best Cassidy in the league. And don't forget that he also has a Doomfist in his back pocket. But along with these two, the team also has Stalker, who's been playing for Seoul's academy team for almost 3 years and is finally 18 and ready to be promoted. This guy is a cracked flex DPS, though has a very similar hero pool to that of Prophet, playing heroes like Genji, Echo, and Tracer. He'll likely come in for a double projectile meta, or maybe there's a hero that he's better at than Prophet, like Echo for instance. He definitely has his fair share of uses to this team, but expect Prophet and Fitz to be the starters for most of the time. Then for the tank line, they are currently working with only Smurf, and this is the part that concerns me. The Dynasty posted a roster reveal video and made it seem like Smurf would be their only tank heading into Overwatch 2. If that is the case, then there is reason to be concerned, but if anyone is gonna be a solo tank in Overwatch 2, Smurf is the man for the job. He had a bit of a down year last season, but the times that he did come in to play the monkey, he still looked like a top 5 Winston, and the few times he played ball he was also good. His Orisa and Rhine haven't been as good as of late, but that's mostly due to the fact that Super was playing those heroes. Throughout his Overwatch 1 career he's played every main tank to a pretty high level and even a bit of Zarya and Hog here and there. He's consistent and pretty flexible. I have faith that he can return to the elite level tank status he was at in 2020. On to the supports, Creative, Jonak and Vindame. This support line has an incredibly high ceiling. All 3 of these guys have found lots of success in playoff situations. For Creative it was the 2020 Grand Finals run, for Jonak it was the entirety of Season 1. And for Vindame it was winning the most recent season of Korean Contenders with O2 Blast. When talking about these guys individually, Jonak has always been a great flex support. He was literally the first player to ever win MVP in Season 1, and you guys probably already know this by now, but at his peak he was the best Zen in the league, and his Ana, Bap and Moira have always been amazing as well. Despite not being as good last year, I think that was mostly due to the fact that he wasn't surrounded by a lot of good players. Now that he is on a stacked roster, I have faith that he will return to his old form. Meanwhile, Creative was probably the best part of last year's Dynasty roster aside from the DPS. His Ana, Zen, and Bap have all been pretty good, especially his Ana. His ceiling isn't as high as Jonax, but he does what the team needs him to do, and he should make for a good backup for double flex support metas. And then there's Vindame, who is coming off back-to-back Korean Contenders Championships. This guy is mostly known for his Brig play, which is absolutely incredible, but his Mercy and Lucio aren't too bad either. He's a very promising main support and one of the best on the market. Finally, the coaching. We can all finally celebrate that Chengdu is gone. His horrible read on the meta and dumb strategies will no longer hold this team back. To replace him, Toby will be taking over the role of head coach. Despite having no coaching experience, he should theoretically be a great coach. Immediately putting him at head coach is very questionable, that can't be denied. But he's been playing the game professionally ever since 2016 and has a very deep understanding of the game. His veteran presence should at least make for a better foundation than that of Chengdu. Toby will also have the help of 3 assistant coaches, Wizard Hyong, who will be returning to this team after missing Season 4, and MMA and Bongwiri, who have both been with the team since Season 3. These guys returning could also lead to a few question marks. Wizard Hyong is one of the weirdest coaches in OWL history, going from the dominant 2018 NYXL to the pathetic 2019 Justice, then to the extremely inconsistent 2020 Dynasty, and now back to the Dynasty in 2022. I really don't know what to think of this guy. He gets different results every year. However, maybe now that he isn't head coach and he's not under Chengdu, he could actually make this team strong. Then MMA and Bongwiri have both been with this organization for a while, so they know a lot of the players well. This coaching staff could either be a massive failure or a massive success. It's a real gamble what they've gone for this season. I'm predicting that they end up being a massive success though, just simply because Chengdu is gone. Overall, this Dynasty roster is working with some really strong pieces, but small issues like Smurf being the solo tank and uncertainty within the coaching staff hold this team back from top 3. Dallas Fuel. This team is honestly looking just as strong as last year, if not more strong. Starting with the best part of the team, I still think it has to be the tank line, which in my opinion is the best tank line in the league. Hanban and Fearless were arguably the 2 best tanks in the league last year, and both were at least top 5. Hanban's ability to play every off-tank to a high level is insane. His D.Va, Zarya and Cigar are all top 5 in my opinion, with his D.Va being the best in the league. Meanwhile, Fearless was the best Winston and Rhine in the league last season, and I don't think a lot of people will disagree with me on that. And he's shown the ability to play hog and ball to a high level as well. Despite not being able to play together, I still have confidence that these two can still dominate separately. Now on to the DPS, and the Fuel have resigned Doha and Sparkle and brought along Gario and Edison. Personally, I think that Edison wasn't a super useful signing. Not only did Sparkle play the Trace really well, but Edison wasn't even considered a top Tracer last season. Sure, that's mostly due to the fact that he didn't get to play much, but the few times he did play the Tracer it wasn't anything super special, and if you're going to say he could be a hitscan player for the team, Gario has the troll taken. I don't expect him to get much playtime. On to the rest of the DPS line. Let's discuss Sparkle and Doha. Bringing these two guys back is super big for this team. As I like to say, if it isn't Ash Cassidy or Widow, Sparkle or Doha, or both can play it. Both of these guys were incredibly flexible last season. Sparkle played super good on Tracer, Genji, Doomfist, Symmetra, Pharah, Echo, and even a bit of Reaper and Soldier. Meanwhile, Doha played super good on Mei, Sombra, Genji, Echo, Hanzo, and Reaper. When these two guys were clicking, they were dominating everyone in the lobby, and I don't see any reason why they won't do the same heading into Overwatch 2. Then to round out the DPS line, the Fuel have brought along Gario from Team Diamond to be their main hitscan. Despite not playing for a super good team, he still managed to show incredible mechanics on Ash, Cassidy and Widow. I expect Sparkle and Doha to start for a majority of the time. but if we ever head into a hard hitscan meta he will likely come in and click on some heads. Next let's discuss the support line. The Fuel have retained Fielder and brought along Chio. Starting off with Fielder, this guy was extremely good both years he played in the league even when on high ping at 6 AM. His synergy with the rest of the Fuel is great and he's shown the ability to play every flex support to an elite level. His BAP and Dano are both top 5 and he was by far the best Moira in the league, and despite not playing it much his Zen was pretty good as well. Then talking about Chio, I think he should make for a nice upgrade or side grade to Jexay. His ceiling is definitely much higher, but something inside me tells me that he might underperform. He's coming off of winning the most recent season of Korean Contenders with O2 Blast, and when he did play his performances on Lucio, Brig and Mercy were all pretty good. However, the reason I'm concerned is that with Repel retiring the Fuel currently have no double flex support option. Chia hasn't shown the ability to play any BAP, so that could lead to this team struggling in double flex support metas, but I have faith that it won't be that big a deal. Finally, the coaching. The Fuel have brought back Coach of the Year Rush and Assistant Coach Aid, and brought in Rascal as a new assistant coach. This coaching staff is absolutely cracked. Coach of the Year Rush coming in to lead this team once again inspires tons of confidence. The fact that this guy won the May Melee and finished top 3 in 3 other tournaments including the playoffs while being down a hitscan player is incredible. Although it wasn't a big deal in the long term, losing XZ 3 days before the start of the season was a big deal in most people's eyes, and for good reason. But despite that, Coach Rush made it work and made it work to perfection. This guy honestly redefined the meta around Sparkle and Doha's hero pools. It's actually incredible. Meanwhile, Assistant Coach Aid was by his side the whole time and definitely deserves to be brought back as well. Then Rascal coming in and returning to his former team as a coach similar to McGravy with the Mayhem is pretty cool. Despite not being super good in Season 4 at his peak, he was super flexible and he was always a fun guy to be around. I think his veteran presence and general knowledge of the game should help this team quite a bit, similar to Toby with the Dynasty. Overall, this team is stacked from top to bottom. Every role is filled with one or more elite level players. I just think the fact that they don't have a super good double flex support option yet drops them down a little bit. LA Gladiators. Now this is a team looking to win the title. This roster is elite in every way, shape and form. Starting with the best part of the team, I think it has to be the supports. A lot of you may disagree with me when I say this, but I think this is the best support line in the league. Last year everyone was super high on their support line. But now that we know what Skewed is capable of, I'd argue this year the support line is even better. When talking about these players in depth, it goes without saying that they're all top tier. Shu was a top 3 flex support in the league last season, playing every flex support to an elite level. His Zen was top 5, Moira was top 5, Ana was top 3, and especially his BAP, which was the best in the league. His damage-heavy style of playing the game is what enables this team to succeed. Meanwhile, Skewed was expected to be mostly benched last season, yet in the second half of the season he became the full-time starter almost always, and for good reason. His Brig was arguably the best in the league and at least top 3. His BAP and Zen were also pretty good the few times he played it in double flex support comps, and especially in Overwatch 2 when double flex support metas are expected to be more common. He fits the bill perfectly. Then to round out this support line, the Glads have signed Funny Astro, a reasonable side grade to Moth who wasn't starting that much anyways. This guy's skill ceiling is through the ceiling. What he showed this year and last year were some of the best main support play I've ever seen. His Lucio is one of the best in the league. I'd even argue top 5 in 2021 and definitely at least top 3 in 2020. His Mercy and Brig are also top tier. At his peak he was top 5 at both of those heroes as well. I'm hoping that since he plays a lot more damage heavy and aggressive, he'll work better with Shu than Moth did. These 3 guys are all top tier at their respective positions and can absolutely pounce at any given moment. It's like not even fair. How do the Glads manage to have two top-tier brig players when most teams don't even have one? Moving on to the DPS, the Glads have resigned Kefster and brought in Ons and Patifan. Starting with Kefster, what is there to say that hasn't already been said? He's a super flexible and disgustingly cracked on everything he plays, second best tracer in the league, elite level Echo, elite level Mei, elite level Pharah, elite level Genji, and he can even play hitscan characters like Cassidy and Ashe if needed to. Bringing him back is huge, especially heading into Overwatch 2. Ons and Patifan, however, are both hit or miss. At their peaks both of these guys have dominated. Ons dominated in 2020 Shock on Widow and Ashe, meanwhile Patifan dominated in Contenders and during the 2018 World Cup playing Genji, Widow, Doomfist, Pharah and Tracer. However, more recently both haven't been super good. Ons rejoining the Shock in the middle of the season didn't pan out the way they were hoping. He had like 2 good games and mostly only played Cassidy. Meanwhile Patifan has recently been struggling in ranked after coming back from Valorant. However, the coaching staff, which we'll talk about later, should be able to put these guys back into shape, because both of their ceilings are as high as Kefster's if not higher. I have faith that both will return to their prime forms. Next, let's discuss the tanks. Space and Rainier are going to be the purple tanks for the first year of Overwatch 2. Starting with Space, he is a very well-known and proven talent throughout the history of the Overwatch 1 era. Every year he's been consistently above average to elite level on Diva, and his Hog and Sigma were both super good as well. His Zarya isn't as good as his other heroes, but he's definitely not terrible at it, and that shouldn't be much of a problem. He's very good at doing his job, and at his peak he can rival any off-tank in the world. Then there's Rainier, who's a little lesser known. To give you a brief background, this guy played for American Tornado during their dominant stretch and most recently Redbird during their dominant stretch. Throughout the past 2 years in NA Contenders he has been the most successful main tank by far. His play on every main tank, Ball and Rhine especially, has been something else. He's a big playmaker and an extremely aggressive player who very much deserves a spot in the league. Finally, the coaching. The Glads have promoted Face to head coach, and brought in 2 new assistant coaches, Hunter and Smash. All these guys have a lot of great experience coaching. Face has been with this team since Season 3 and should be good since he knows a lot of the players. Meanwhile, Hunter was with British Hurricane for the first half of their domination in 2020, the Valiant in their relatively good year in 2020, and the Atlanta Reign in their very successful campaign in Season 4, even making it to Grand Finals. And Smash was one of the O2 Blast coaches during their back-to-back Korean Contenders victories. All 3 of these coaches have found high levels of success in 2021 and should make for an incredible foundation. Top 3 coaching staff in the league undoubtedly. Overall, aside from some small concerns with Ons and Patifan, this team is basically perfect, but no one can stand up to the number 1 team. However, Shanghai Dragons. I know that this is the boring answer, but realistically there is no better team. They kept their entire starting lineup, all of which are amazing. Starting with the DPS, Flater, Lip and Who Are You have all been signed through 2022. Lip was in my opinion the second best player in the league last season. He played so many heroes and dominated on all of them. His aim and game sense were both some of the best I've ever seen. Something that a lot of hitscan players have struggled with is getting the best of both worlds, aim and game sense, and Lip is one of the only players who's been able to be super good at both. He played all of the following characters to an elite level: Sombra, Tracer, Cassidy, Ashe, Reaper, and even the heroes he rarely played he still managed to pop off on, like Hanzo, Widow and Sim. The guy is a one-of-a-kind player, the likes of which is very rare to see. Flater was also an amazing player. He may not have been as good as Lip, but he was still an elite level player. He won MVP in 2020 for a reason. The guy plays a lot of heroes to an elite level as well: Tracer, Echo, Reaper, Pharah, Mei, Genji, and even a bit of Torb. Both of these guys are some of the best DPS to have ever touched the game. And on top of all that they have Who Are You, who will most likely be benched for most of the time, but he'll make for a good Doom, Genji and double projectile specialist. Next let's discuss the tanks. Fate and Void just played so well last year. Fate had to fill in for Fearless last season and did it and then some. His Wrecking Ball and Orisa were both top 2 in the league, and I'd argue he was the best ball in the league. His Winston and Rhine weren't as good, but were still top half of the league for sure. He was one of the only main tanks in the league last season who managed to play every main tank to a consistent level. Then there's Void, who kind of just speaks for himself. He can play one of the best divas of all time, a top 3 Sigma, a top half Zarya, and even the few times he pulled out Hog he looked pretty good as well. A super consistent player who also barely ever dies. This tank line is extremely stable and flexible, which are both things that should make them top tier in Overwatch 2. Now for the supports. Lee Jae-gon and Izayaki were both so big for the Dragons in 2021. Both of them had some questionable moments in 2020, but in 2021 they both looked flawless. Izayaki played every flex support to an elite level, being arguably the best flex support in the league. His Zen and Ana were best in the league, and his Bap and Moira were top 5. He had very great positioning and had some incredible pop-off moments. Meanwhile Lee Jae-gon was top 3 at every main support, even being the best Mercy in the league in my opinion, and arguably the best Lucio and Brig as well. He also was never afraid to go for a flashy play like a Lucio boop or a Mercy pistol kill, but he was able to get away with doing those kinds of plays because of his incredible synergy with the rest of his team. He always held his ground and did a great job of keeping all the Dragons safe. Although the Dragons are yet to sign a second flex support, it probably won't be that big of an issue because Lee Jae-gon very briefly showed the ability to play BAP during the playoffs and Zen that one time in the Summer Showdown finals, so they're set for double flex support metas. Finally, the coaching. The Dragons have brought back head coach Moon, and assistant coaches Demon and Kong, and brought in new assistant Pavane. This staff is top tier. Moon literally won Esports Coach of the Year and has a great reputation in recent years. He's been with this team since Season 3 and has brought them so much success, so bringing him back for Overwatch 2 is super good for the team. Then for the assistant coaches they have Kong, who's also been with the team since Season 3, so bringing him back is really good. Demon, who joined the team in the middle of last year right before the Summer Showdown, he was with the team throughout their most dominant stretches of time, so bringing him back is really good as well. And to round out the coaching staff they have brought in Pavane. This guy is a little questionable. He was on NYXL for Seasons 1 and 2 when they were super good. But then he was on Spitfire in Season 3 and then retired for an entire year. Even though this guy has had an up and down reputation, I think he was picked up for a reason. The org wouldn't have signed him if he wasn't a super good coach, so I don't have any concerns, especially since he's surrounded by some of the best coaches in the league. Overall this team is the best, undeniably. They are coming off of back-to-back stage titles, a grand finals victory, and have kept almost every piece that made last year so successful. There's almost no world in which this team doesn't do super well. And that's gonna do it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe for more, and until next time, bye bye.